Yeah, what was interesting to me in listening to the comments of others and sort of juxtaposing that with my approach, which does tend to be very geographic. I'm again looking at that map and going, well, there were, 23 to 25 local areas as described by the city. There's actually, from my analysis, 50 neighborhoods or 100, as Scott has put, 110 walkable catchment areas. So when I'm thinking about a citywide plan, I am looking at it very much as it's the fabric of this piece of land that we're talking about here. And a lot of the discussions were really about values, things that we'd like to do from a social perspective. And I think we have to, in defining this plan, keep in mind that we are talking about how this land is defined in the future, how we need to understand how it's defined now, how we got to the place that we are now. So actually, it is important to be informed by the past. The city was an amalgamation of smaller municipalities up until 1929, and the way that the city has grown since the original city plan is really reflective of those early divisions. So I do think it's important to be informed by the past and focus on really what the plan is. And the plan, while we need to be aware of changes and effects of the local economy, at the end of the day, this is a local government. We are not the senior levels of government, and our jurisdiction is very much limited by determining land use. So that, when we talked a lot about a lot of values, and those values, we have to be careful in not being too deterministic in imposing those values, because again, we were elected by the people that are eligible to vote in Vancouver. We're here to represent them, and in order to do that, we need to hear from them, which is, I think, the key thing that we've heard from this exercise across the board is we have to do the best possible job that we can do from hearing from the people at the grassroots where they live, and then bringing that information up. But it needs, to not just be done in a one-size-fits-all way. It needs to be done in such a way that really reflects the character of those 110 walkable catchment areas with schools, with parks, with high streets, with transportation. So as interesting as it is for me to hear the values side of things, I'm pretty much a nuts and bolts person, and the city is very much a nuts and bolts kind of exercise. And so I think it's going to be a challenge for us to reconcile values material that's more conceptual or social in nature versus the nuts and bolts of how do we determine land use and in our planning going forward. That's the tension.
Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned the historical patterns. That would be a really interesting exercise to mine out that, show that those changes, how we got to where we are today. I think, is that what you were suggesting?
Sure, and you've often heard the saying, for those that don't know, see the mistakes of the past are doomed to repeat them. So I think this is again why it's very important to understand how we got to the point that where we are. Yes, we've got a great opportunity to move forward with imagination, but it's important that we understand how we got to this point, and also ensure that what we're talking about in shaping this plan actually is within our jurisdiction's ability to affect that plan.
Yeah. Just a sidebar quickly, for American cities, we go back and we look at the city fabric before the freeway onslaught. And one thing I've always admired about Vancouver is you kept them out of the central city, and the result is very obvious, because now we're going back to try to repair all these torn fabrics in American cities, and it's a huge challenge.
And the example of the freeway is a very apt one, because it demonstrated how the power of the people at the grassroots in this city made that change and actually successfully fought City Hall at the time.
Yeah.
So again, the biggest thing for me in this whole deal is being able to tap the people at the broadest possible level, to be able to collect feedback at the grassroots level, aggregate it upward by neighborhood, all the way up to the local areas, to the zones throughout the city and the citywide plan ultimately. But
Okay.
again, if I could just emphasize one more time, we have to be cautious about our ability to be going from the grassroots up and not be coming from the top down and imposing our values on the people, rather listening to them first and then aggregating that up.
Right.